If you want to be not just a great leader, but a memorable leader for your nonprofit organization, this three-part series is for you. This is not for those who believe that leadership is about power over others. This is about our responsibility to empower others. It's about being a mindful leader who cares about the people who rely on us for leadership. My guest, professor and author Theresa Ricke-Kiely, will reveal the knowledge we need to know to be the best leaders we can be in her new book, The Path to Mindful Leadership: Practices for Nonprofit Success. Now, as a bonus for watching, we are offering a QR code to access the first chapter of her book, which we will cover during this video. Just go to the link below and download it. If you want to order the book, there is also a link below for that as well. We want you to be successful leading your nonprofit, and to do so, we offer the Nonprofit Docs videos for free. We're not selling anything, but in exchange, we would appreciate if you would like and subscribe to our channel, as this is what keeps our videos coming. We would really appreciate that, but only subscribe if you consider yourself a nonprofit professional who wants to change the world for the better. Why? Because that's what we do here at Nonprofit Docs. We give you the tools and the knowledge to make the world a better place. And most importantly, we want your comments because we want to know what kind of challenges you're facing so that we can help you. We can create videos about that. Now, let's get started with part 1 of 3 of The Path to Mindful Leadership with Dr. Theresa Ricke-Kiely. With a career spanning over 30 years, Dr. Theresa Ricke-Kiely has made significant contributions to nonprofit leadership, management, and mindfulness. Her early work involves supporting and advocating for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, leading to her role as director of a large residential program in New York. In academia, she has taught and administered programs at Marist College, the University of South Carolina Upstate, the University of St. Thomas, and the University of Notre Dame. Now she is a faculty member at the University of Arizona School of Government and Public Policy, teaching leadership and nonprofit management. She is also a coach-sultant, providing mindful leadership coaching and nonprofit leadership consulting. She's an accomplished author, and her recent publication is The Path to Mindful Leadership: Practices for Nonprofit Success, and it underscores her expertise and commitment to the field. So, Theresa Ricke-Kiely, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here, Mark.
And just so everybody knows, Theresa and I go back quite a few years now.
Yeah, it's
How long
been a
has it
while.
been now, I think, before we started working together?
Yeah, it was the 2009, 2010.
Yeah, probably 2009. So it's been
Yeah,
over 15 years.
yeah.
So we go way back. We were both at the University of Notre Dame, and then Theresa went on to bigger and better things. And she and her husband, David, and I and my fiance have all been good friends. But most importantly, she is an expert in this field, not only as a practitioner, but as an academic, a teacher, an author, so on and so forth. So today we're going to talk about your book that you have just published a few months ago called The Path to Mindful Leadership, which is kind of a guidebook for nonprofit leaders, right?
That's right.
And so my first question is, when you say it's for nonprofit leaders, is there a difference between nonprofit leadership and governmental leadership and for-profit leadership that is fairly significant in your eyes?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question, and one that I teach my students and my consulting folks all the time, because people conflate those terms. Nonprofit leadership really has the goal to improve the quality of life of people in some form or way. Usually they have a mission, they serve a population, they serve a community. When it comes to nonprofit leadership, those profits go right back into the mission, not into the pockets of a CEO or other investors. It really, you're there to help facilitate that mission and making sure that it's funded. Governmental leadership is a little different. They serve the public interest, but they also look at how do they redistribute resources so everybody gets the same type of service. So those resources are usually taxes, and we look at how we can redistribute those in a town, in a state, or federally in a nation. So, for example, when we look at the post office, that was never intended to be a money making, profitable program. It was to make sure that people could send letters, bills, etc., for a small fee and that everybody gets that service. Business, on the other hand, sells goods or services, and their primary reason for being is to make a profit. The CEO gets a little bit of that, or other shareholders or investors. And if they don't make profits, they won't last for very long. That doesn't mean that they can't have a mission. A lot of businesses do have good missions that they support, but they wouldn't be in business if they broke even, so to speak. So very different sectors.
So as you were talking, and you were talking about the post office and talking about how these organizations are different, I was thinking a lot of people in government are saying the post office needs to pay for itself. And you're saying that was never the original intent.
That's
The original
correct.
intent was to give people the benefit regardless of the cost.
Right.
So what we're doing here is we're debating something that was never the original intent anyway.
That's right. We
Uh,
all use
so
public roads that are paid by tax dollars.
uh,
Many of us have gone to public school. Some of us, didn't go to that, but certainly it provides that service, which is good for all of us. It's good for our communities, it's good for business, and it's good for the nation.
Right. So as I'm looking at leadership and I'm thinking about nonprofit leadership, it seems to me that there are specific things that nonprofit leaders have to know and do that other kinds of leaders don't. Would you agree with that? And if so, what kinds of things would they do that other leaders would not?
They really need to know how to manage differently and how to lead differently. So, in a nonprofit, you have a board of directors. That's a different leadership style and how you manage that board than if you are the sole owner of an organization or a business. So, you need to understand how to get a board that is strategic, how they can help bring in funding, how they can manage the reputation of the organization. Other sectors don't have to worry as much about that. So, it is a little bit different. They also have to make sure that their mission is being realized in the community. That's a very different skill set to understand your impact. It's not about the bottom line always, although a nonprofit must have a healthy bottom line, but making sure that that mission is realized and that you are making a difference in the community. Otherwise, you would cease to exist.
It seems to me, and this is maybe my prejudice, that people who are leaders of the nonprofit sector have a more difficult time of leading because we don't have the same incentives to give people as, let's say, even the government sector or the for-profit sector. We don't have the kind of benefits that are offered, kind of pensions, the kind of mobility, the kind of raises, bonuses, stock options, 401k, so on and so forth. So my experience has been you have to have a leadership skill that attracts people to you and the organization for reasons other than monetary gain and advancement and things like that.
Yeah, it's about meaning and purpose for many of us. You can go other places and get paid more, but what is the purpose and what is the meaning and how are you changing lives? And most people I've met in the nonprofit sector really believe in committing to those qualities to make sure that the people that they are serving, have a better quality of life and that their communities are served. Though there are some nonprofits that do pay well, and that do have great benefits. Sometimes people are attracted into that because of that, but hopefully not only because of that.
Well, I was just reading an article today that talked about all of the top CEOs in the nonprofit sector. About 30% of them have retired and left. And a lot of them have left because of the stress of running a
Mhm.
nonprofit organization. And, there's more expectation, there's bigger need, financial resources aren't as large. Of course, right now we have government grants being cut and done away with in many instances. And there's a lot of these kind of pressures coming on, and they're saying either I'm done, I'm going to retire, or I'm done with the nonprofit sector, I'm going to go over here to the for-profit sector, maybe the government sector, where there are more resources. Now, as I'm as I was reading this, your book came to mind. And by the way, I have your book right here, and it's all dog-eared for those of you. But we're only going to talk basically about the first chapter today, but we're going to kind of skip ahead. And I'm going to ask you, given all of these pressures of the nonprofit leadership that other leaders may not have, how does mindfulness come into the picture? How does it help us become better leaders?
That's a really good question. And mindfulness, the definition that I created is fairly long, but to simplify it, it really is about making sure that when you are leading, that you are responding, not reacting. And you and I, Mark, have had leaders that have just been very reactive, which doesn't create a healthy workplace. So mindfulness, and if you use the practices, really teach you to slow down and to think. And for most of us in the sector, there are not life and death situations where you have to make a decision immediately. You can actually pause, even though you're being pushed to make a decision quickly. So slowing down, responding, taking in all the information, listening, and not reacting. Mindful leaders also really take a look at listening deeply without judging. And that includes judging ourselves. I mean, I know when I was a young practitioner in human services, I would beat myself up because I didn't do something, I didn't say something right, a family member didn't respond to one of the service recipients and didn't respond well to my messaging, etc. So sometimes you have to have compassion for yourself that you can't do everything. And in my early years, and still in some organizations, then the nonprofit organization can be quite exploitative. They want you to work 18 hours a day, and that's just not possible. So how do you kind of slow down and prioritize and make sure that you and your staff have that balance? Mindful leaders are also present focused. So when they are talking to their clients or their service recipients or their staff or their board or a donor, they really are focused on the conversation and not multitasking and doing other things. And they're role models. They authentically demonstrate the same kind of compassion and empathy for themselves as they do for their teams. So when it comes to financial pressures, and those are real today, I don't think I've seen this many federal grants cut, and organizations are closing down. I mean, communities are really going to suffer without the resources needed because right now philanthropy isn't stepping up. I hope they do, but you're talking about billions of dollars out there. No, what we need to do is be good role models in how we're reacting to the situations, be strategic. You might have to tweak your vision a little bit because you don't have the resources. Step back and then come together as a team to say, okay, how are we going to manage this forward? So it's a tough time out there. And I think mindfulness will really allow people to not react and really respond with purpose and intention.
I think that's a great point. And I think if you have mindfulness, you think about not just what's happening in the moment, but what ramifications your decisions may have down the line. And so you don't have the knee-jerk reaction that you usually would have. And I also know that sometimes leaders are not responsive to people because they're more task oriented than they are people oriented. And is there a balance here? When we talk about mindfulness, is there a balance of, all right, you've got a job to do, but you also are in the business of managing people. How do we balance that? And does mindfulness help?
Yeah. I actually, when I work with clients or when I work with my students, there is actually a assessment that looks at your task orientation versus your relationship orientation. And it's helpful. Mindfulness is about being self-aware. Where are your strengths and where are your gap areas? So if we find somebody heavily on the task-oriented side, you may need to say, one of your tasks might be to develop relationships. because that's really important in the third sector. If you don't have those relationships, you're not going to get great board members. You're not going to get your teams to respond well. Donors might not react the way you want. On the other hand, if you have somebody very relational and they don't understand that things need to get done, they need to address that gap area. And so many of us have a preference to one side or the other. And you have to figure out, well, how does that get done in this organization? And how can I practice those skills so I am more in the middle? So mindfulness is really about being self-aware. What are my strengths? What are those gap areas or improvement areas? And then being very intentional about gathering feedback to see if you are making progress in that. And
Mm.
so many leaders don't do that. They think, okay, well, I'm good at this. But if you don't get feedback or if that's not how you show up to others, it doesn't really matter what you think. You're still not being as effective as you would like to be.
Yeah, I think feedback is really good idea, like a 360 evaluation or something like that, because we do have blind spots
Yeah.
and we're not good at everything. And it's funny, you were talking about when you, in your early days of leadership, used to beat yourself up over things and bad decisions and whatever. And what I realized was when I was a young leader, I used to think I had to know everything, or
Hmm.
people weren't going to,
Yeah.
they weren't going to think that I was a very good leader.
Yeah.
And what I've realized as I've gotten older in leadership positions is, um, you have to realize that you're going to be ignorant most of the time. There's no way. There's so much knowledge out there and so much going on in the world that you can't know everything. So you have to rely on people who are experts in those areas
Hmm.
that you do not have the expertise on in. And I heard a saying one, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but it said that management is about managing things and leadership is about managing
Absolutely.
people,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So making that transition from managing a project or a task or whatever, and then getting promoted to a leadership position where now you have to manage the people that are doing those tasks.
Mhm.
Is that a big jump for some people?
Oh, it sure is. And in our field, and it happens in other fields too, but we are very good at saying, "Oh, you are very good at this task or this, this position. Why don't we promote you and now you're supervising people?" And those are two very different skill sets. Being able to, if you are in the medical field, dealing with medicines or taking a blood pressure, that's a very different skill than, now I'm supervising nursing or medical staff. And we all have done this. We're like, oh, you're very good at this, that task oriented kind of perspective. And now you should manage people. And I am a big proponent of making sure that people are ready to lead because you're not the only one that thinks that, oh, I've got to know everything. And that's where you make a lot of mistakes. It looks like arrogance. And now you're becoming a little bit of an autocratic leader because you're not using the strengths of your team to get the answers that you need. Leaders don't have to have all the answers, as you now know, but they need to know where to get them. And that's why
Right.
typically you have a team. You don't have to have all the skills. You just need to know who to depend on. So when I work with boards of directors, a lot of boards are like, "Well, I don't know how to ask for money. That's not something I'm good at." And first thing I say is, "Well, do you want to get good at it? Like this is a skill you can learn." But if they don't feel comfortable with it, that's okay. That's why you have a development director or a fundraising director. You make the introduction, and then that person will take over that ask because it is a specialized skill.
It is, and it really is relational because about 90-95% of fundraising is building relationships with donors, and that has nothing to do with about asking for money.
Yep.
And boards can certainly be engaged in that, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, I have learned that if I try to be humble when I go into a meeting and say, "Look, here's what I don't know. Can you help me?" People are more than willing to share their expertise with you, and it also shows that you respect their expertise.
That's right.
Whereas if you go in there with, saying, "I know everything and you're going to follow my lead," that's a lot more difficult sell. When you were talking about promoting people because they're good at tasks, years ago, I was in the retail jewelry business many, many, many moons ago. And the company used to promote the top salesman to the management positions. because they felt that they would inspire other people to sell, because that's the
Yeah.
name of the game, right?
Right.
It was often a nightmare because
Yeah.
they were great salespeople, but they were terrible at managing people. We do need to keep that in mind. And so let me ask you this. As a leader, is there a certain position or title we need to hold to say, okay, I'm a leader now?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that leadership is not positional, and people make this mistake all the time. You can be a leader and have leadership skills without, getting a paycheck. We have community leaders, we have civil rights leaders, social justice leaders. Any kind of leadership that's out there doesn't necessarily need a position, and people confuse that all the time. But it really depends on your goal mark. If you want to be a CEO, you probably have a very different track of what kind of positions you want to hold than if you want to be a fundraising director. If you want to get to that top level, and many people I work with do want to be that executive director or CEO, we first need to understand, do you have the conceptual skills? To be at that top leadership position, you really need to know how to strategize, how to create a vision, how to know that your mission is being realized in your community. And those are all very conceptual skills. They're not task oriented necessarily,
Mhm.
they really are abstractions. And so people need to make sure that they have that skill set first. But many times it means climbing the ladder to gain experience. Most of us don't start at the entry level and then all of a sudden we're asked to be the executive director unless we're a very small organization. So it really is about gathering information, finding out what other skills people have in similar positions, and understanding what your goal is and your time frame for that goal. I have a lot of 22-year-olds that say, "Well, I want to be executive director by the time I'm 25." Okay, you have a lot to learn and there's a lot of experience, and I can teach you all kinds of things about leadership. I can engage you in case studies, I can give you practices, but until it's your name on that front page and you're doing the risk and it's your reputation on the line, you really don't understand how powerful a leadership position is. And unfortunately, that's how we learn about good leadership is through those mistakes. And so a lot of people will say, make a lot of mistakes and errors early so you learn that so that you can develop leadership skills and climb that ladder.
Yeah, and you and I know from teaching at the higher educational level, we can teach out of the textbook, we can teach from our
Hmm.
own experience, but the only way you really learn is by making the mistakes and
Hmm.
gaining your own wisdom and your own philosophy.
That's right.
And that
That's right.
takes years. And
Yeah.
you don't want to jump into something too soon because you could set yourself up for failure. And
Hmm.
uh, and the other thing is, I've noticed even if people have PhDs or MDs or whatever, people assume that they'll be really good leaders. And what I have found now, I'm probably going to get in trouble for this with higher ed, but I have to speak my truth. What I have found in higher ed is people get promoted into associate provost, dean, whatever, for all kinds of reasons, most of which usually have nothing to do with leadership. And the problem, for instance, in academia or in the medical field or whatever, is that your knowledge is very narrow. If you're a historian, your knowledge is, let's say, the knowledge of the Civil War.
Hmm.
That's your thing. And the way you get promoted is you become the expert in that area. When you get promoted to leadership, now you have a whole myriad of things that you need to learn, such as relationships with people. And I know faculty members who are good with that and some who are not.
Hmm.
And so that's a whole different skill set to learn, regardless of what your academic credentials are. I wonder how many institutions could advance their leadership by getting them educated. I mean, can you educate leaders, or are leaders born
Uh,
and
Good
not
question.
made?
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that we can teach them. Otherwise, I would be out of a job.
Well, we
But
don't
of
want
course,
that. Yes.
but of course, there are born leaders. There are people born with certain traits that naturally advance. They're charismatic. They have empathy. They're extroverted. And many people really appreciate those traits. It doesn't mean that if you don't have them, that you're not a leader. That is certainly not true. I know a lot of introverts who are excellent leaders. So we can go back into this nature nurture debate, and I want to say it's both. You can be a born leader, but certainly you can teach people how to lead in situations. And even if you have leadership traits, not everybody wants to be a leader. I mean, I
Right.
know that I have mentored many staff and team members over the years, and it's like you would really be a good manager, or you'd be a good coordinator. And people are like, I don't want to do it. I don't want that responsibility. I mean, we have to respect that as well. But so much about leadership is situational. So you might be a good leader in human services, but then you go over to the arts and it's a totally different experience. So you may not survive. And you and I have been around a lot where we've seen economic downturns, and then all of a sudden we see all kinds of business people say, "Oh, well, I can't get a business job right now because the economy is down. I'm going to go and run a nonprofit." And it
Yes.
doesn't work out well because they're not there for the right reasons, as we mentioned earlier in this conversation. But the skill sets are different. And when people are desperate just to get a paycheck, it doesn't make them a better leader. It probably makes them a worse leader.
Yeah, I've heard business leaders say, I'm tired of the pressure cooker of business and the financial expectations, so I'm going to go over to the easier sector, the nonprofit sector, and I have to constantly challenge that.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's not easier at all, and if that's their motivation, it really is. They create a lot of problems for people, at least in my experience. But this is where coaching helps. Like, if you wanna climb the ladder and you wanna get a different kind of position, having somebody coach you and talk to you about your gap areas, figure out where your strengths are, that's all really helpful as you climb that leadership ladder. So those are things that you can do if you don't feel like you're ready for a leadership position, or you don't feel like you're a born leader. And you talked about telling your truth. I really believe in having truth tellers out there in leadership positions that will tell you, when something doesn't feel right to them. It's really hard to find a good truth teller. Most people are conflict averse and they don't want to share what your experience is. But in every single position I've had, in leadership positions, I've asked different people to kind of give me feedback about how I came across. And that's really a position of trust, because not everybody wants to tell you, how they're experiencing you. But those types of things really help you, understand where your gap areas are, where your strengths are. And, hopefully you can intentionally come up with a path to be a better leader.
And there are some leaders, quite frankly, that don't want to know the truth.
Oh, absolutely.
So if
Absolutely.
you share with them and you get penalized for that,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
learn to not be as forthcoming, and,
Yeah.
I've certainly experienced that, and I've had actually leaders come to me and say, "Hey, I wanna know what's really going on," and I've told them, and I've had to pay the price for it, right? So, unfortunately, I think as leaders, I think there was one of the speakers that I watch on YouTube, he said, "One of our jobs is to make sure that people feel safe."
Yeah.
And I don't know that a lot of leaders think of that as one of their leadership responsibilities.
Yeah, psychological safety is really important. And as the new workforce comes out, those 20 and 22-year-olds, this is something that they are really looking for. They want to have a right answer. They're not used to the gray. They're afraid of getting in trouble. And that psychological safety is crucial to a healthy environment. If you don't have it, that's where you do see toxicity come up in organizations and with certain leaders, because you're not the only person that has had that blowback from saying something even when asked. But kudos for somebody for even asking, because a lot of leaders don't even understand that they should be more reflective. What am I doing well? Who should give me feedback on this? So many leaders get into the position and it is what it is. And they don't really seek that feedback. Sometimes institutions have 360-degree ways of doing things, and I don't think that's always done well. And again, people are afraid always to kind of share what their truth is because they might not trust the instrument. So having other ways of gaining that and constantly mining that information is really important, Mark.
Yeah, trust is really a big issue, and that's something that takes a long time to establish, and it's very easily violated and done away with, and so I think it's a very fragile thing, but it's absolutely I think it's the foundation of everything. If you don't have that foundation of trust, people aren't gonna tell you the truth. They're not gonna give you their best ideas. They're not going to and I quite frankly, early in my career, I was a bit of a bulldozer, and I thought I had to know everything, and I was rah-rah, zim, boom, bah, let's go get them. And people were afraid to say, "Wait a minute. We need to think about this." They didn't want to dampen my spirits, and, now that I'm older, I wish they would have, 'cause they could have saved me a lot of grief, but they didn't feel safe with me. So I'm wondering, given all of this, we talk about mindfulness, right? And people kinda do a woo-woo connotation of mindfulness. What does it really mean? Is it about meditation? Is it about reflection? Is it about I mean, what do we really mean when we say being mindful?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it means so many different things. So for some people, it may mean meditation, but you don't need to meditate to be mindful. There are so many studies, and it really is coming into the literatures, many literature, business literature, psychological literature, neuroscience, about why mindfulness is important. And really, it is about being self-aware, as we've discussed here. It's about being objective. It's about having equanimity, not flying off the handle, having that emotional control. It's about emotional intelligence and really being understanding, empathetic, and compassionate with others, as well as yourself. And how is that going to be bad for any leader? All of that is going to create that trust you just discussed, that respect, that openness, that psychological safety that leaders need, that teams need, that organizations need. And there's a reason that big companies are doing this. Google is doing this, General Mills. There are, if you just do a search to say, corporations and mindfulness programs, you'll come up with many, many different examples. And that's because it's good for the bottom line too. So it's not only good for your team and your own leadership style, it's good for the organization.
I've always been of the opinion that one of the reasons we have leadership problems and bad leaders is that we're still in an 18th, 20th century leadership model.
Yeah.
And, the Industrial Revolution, where we were cogs in the wheels, but now we're really an information and service society, at least in the United States. And people are demanding more in terms of how they're treated, and especially as they get more education and so on. And I often wonder to myself, to you and to me, what we're talking about makes sense, right?
Hmm.
And I often wonder why other people don't go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's do this." And I've come to conclusion, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're my honest mirror here. Um, I think it's because it's harder, it's more difficult than being what I call a beater instead of a
Hmm.
leader.
Yeah.
It's easier to, order people around and to not listen to people and not be empathetic and all that. It doesn't take as much energy. Now, the result of that is not good, but the short term is could be good,
Yeah.
right? So how do we fight that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. It is much easier to be an autocratic leader. And again, there's
Mhm.
an assessment that I give to people to find out where they land on that scale. Again, as part of self awareness. So if you are an autocrat, you can figure out how to be more participative or when do you need to pull back and be more laissez faire. All three of those skill sets are important. Like, I would not suggest being a participative leader if you have a team and you have to lay off, two people from the team you have. You're not going to have a good conversation by saying, who should we lay off today? It's not going to work. You're going to need to be, you're going to have to be a little autocratic with that and make that decision. But for most decisions, you can gather information, but it takes time and it takes patience. And a lot of times you know the answer, but the process of involving your team, gathering those thoughts, giving them, an empowered sense around the decision making is really helpful and also leads them to grow as a leader.
Yeah.
And that's what we want. We want to have other leaders who can step in when we have an emergency. We want other leaders so that when they get a job, you can say, hey, I mentored that person and now they're the executive director of this organization, and that you led to that. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and people don't necessarily like that. Now, I can say that if you have to have an answer that has to come out a certain way, don't be participative, because then when people find out, well, you already knew what the outcome was going to be, that feels inauthentic. And again, that trust erodes. So you
Right.
have to really understand the differences between, how to be an autocratic leader, how to be a participative leader, and how to be a laissez-faire leader, and when to use those things. I mean, situational leadership is certainly true. And going back to your comment, that we still use very antiquated models of leadership, we sure do. And there are, I have, when I teach graduate students, we actually do a segment every class about in the news, where we look at different leadership models, and we can go right back to transactional leadership. We can go right back to these old, typically white male, US centric models that don't work for most of us anymore. And how do we get out of that to be authentic leaders, to be servant leaders, to be transformational leaders, to be mindful leaders? And that takes a little bit of time to explore, understand, and practice. Leadership is a practice. Mindfulness is a practice. Going back to, you can't just read a book and be it. It's kind of like swimming. If you read a lot of books about swimming, does not make you a swimmer. You have to be able to know yourself, be self-aware, and to practice this, make those mistakes, be humble about it, and learn those lessons so you can be a better leader for you and your team.
Yeah, probably the greatest lesson I learned is not to come up with the solutions, come up with the good questions. And the more questions you ask, the more people are willing to pipe in. I've also learned, because you might be surprised at this, but I'm an extrovert. Um, but I've learned
Shocking.
as an extrovert, sometimes our patience isn't the greatest. And we think that introverts are just shy people, when in fact, introverts, for the most part, are deep thinking people. And we have to give them the space and the safety to want to articulate what they're thinking, because they often have much better ideas than we do. And we need to listen to that. But like you said, that's work.
Yeah.
It takes patience, it takes time. And sometimes we hire leaders sometimes because they are go-getters and not because they are people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's a great kind of intro to this. And what I'd like to do is now go into part two, and we'll make a separate video on this.
Okay.
Let's talk about the traits of good leadership. Can we do that?
Sure.
All right. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with part two, and we're going to talk about the traits of good leadership.